Hello and welcome to Cafetography.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of Canon's most affordable and well-known L-series lenses, the Canon 17-40 f4 USM L. It's designed to be an ultra-wide angle lens for full-frame cameras, although it's actually quite versatile. Its handy zoom range ends at 40mm and it zooms out to an ultra-wide angle of 17mm. You get quite a huge angle of view at 17mm, and when you're using a full-frame camera and the lens's constant maximum aperture of f4, it means it lets in a reasonable amount of light. If you own a Canon APS-C camera, then the zoom range of 17 to 40mm is quite a good general purpose range. Although it's a bit old-fashioned to use it in this way, the lens really was born to be on a full-frame camera for its super wide angles. The first thing we're going to do in this test is to look at the build quality. It's typical for a Canon L-series lens. This piece of equipment is very nicely put together indeed. It feels very solid. The lens zoom ring is very smooth and turns very evenly. The focus ring works the same, being very well damped. As usual, for a lens of this price range, it has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn that focus ring at any time. The lens's front element does not rotate or extend as you change the focus. The USM autofocus motor works very quickly and silently, as you can see here. Overall, this is a typical Canon L-series lens. It has fantastic build quality. In every way, it's going to work very nicely for you in the field. Let's move on and look at the image quality. This is one of Canon's slightly older lenses, so it should be interesting to see how it does on a modern digital camera. We'll start by testing it on a full-frame camera, the 20-megapixel Canon 6D, with chromatic aberration correction and peripheral illumination turned on. At 17mm and f4, the lens is nice and sharp in the middle of the image. It has very nice colours and contrast. As we look into the corners, especially with the extreme corners, we see a fair bit of softness. So things are not looking quite so rosy here. There is a bit of improvement at f5.6, and they're about as sharp as they're going to get at f8. Back in the centre of the image, the picture remains fantastically sharp, so the lens can give you some very nice punchy images with good colours and contrast, but unfortunately those corners show a fairly weak performance. Okay, let's zoom back in again to 40mm. In the centre of the image, at f4, the lens is reasonably sharp, but not completely impressive, and again the corners are a little soft. However, if you stop the lens down to 5.6 and then again to f8, you see some good improvement, and the lens is very sharp in the middle of the image. So at 40mm you're going to get a decent image. However, it's not the sharpest lens we've ever seen. In our next test, we're going to look to see how this lens performs on one of Canon's APS-C cameras. In this instance, we're going to use a 20-megapixel Canon 70D. At 17mm and at f4, the lens is still very nice and sharp in the middle of the image, with very good colours and contrast. The corners are a little soft, but not as bad as they were on a full-frame camera. Dropping the lens down to f5.6, you can see some improvement, and at f8 the corners are better again. However, back in the middle of the image, the picture quality is very nice, so it's a good performance at 17mm, although again the corners of the image could be a little sharper. Let's zoom in to 40mm. And at f4, the lens is reasonably sharp in the middle of the image. The corners look about the same. There's a good improvement at f6, and again at f8. The lens is sharp in the corners, and also back in the middle of the images. So at 40mm, you need to stop the lens down a little to get a really good performance. It's time to look at distortion and vignetting. There are not really any issues on an APS-C camera, so we'll test on a full frame. At 17mm we can see fairly strong barrel distortion and quite heavy vignetting in the corners, which are looking pretty dark. At f5.6 there is a lot more brightness in those corners. You can use peripheral illumination on your camera to improve the situation. Zoom the lens into 30mm and the distortion straightens out, and even at 40mm the distortion isn't particularly bad. So at 17mm the lens has a bit of a struggle on its hands with vignetting and distortion. The distance that this lens can focus down to is about 25 centimeters, which is actually fairly close, as you can see here. The close-up image quality remains quite sharp, even with the aperture wide open at f4, and at f5.6 it gets a touch sharper again. Some good news is that lens works very well against bright lights, without too much in the way of flaring or lack of contrast. That's a pretty important performance considering this is an ultra wide angle lens. You'll often be catching bright lights in your field of view. This lens can give you some gently out of focus backgrounds if you use it in the right way. Thankfully, those out of focus areas look very nice and smooth, which is slightly unusual for such a wide angle zoom lens. It's a very good performance. At the end of the day, the Canon 17-40 f4 USM-L is quite a nicely made lens, which is good value for money, so it's no wonder it's always been quite popular. There's no denying that there are some noticeable optical deficiencies, such as the corners are soft and there's problems with distortion, but despite that, the lens gives a very good looking picture. It has dramatic colours and contrast, and its impressive zoom range makes it useful and fun to use. If you're on the market for a full frame ultra wide angle lens, then this Canon lens is an enjoyable and good value option. To see more of our videos, please subscribe by clicking the button at the bottom right hand side of the page. Thank you. See you again.